Hello, how's it going out there, folks? Welcome back here to a Tuesday afternoon, about 2:10 p.m. California time here, Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. Jumping in here with a special update on this earthquake swarm that is continuing there in Idaho. Quite a bit of earthquake activity ramping up here, not only in the last 24 hours, but over the last week or so. And very noticeable there on the earthquake 3D globe. Obviously, we've seen a lot of earthquake activity, and this is just more than a couple small microquakes around the area of the Sawtooth fault system here, just off the northern end of it. Right, a lot of earthquake activity. So let's take a look here. Got 40 earthquakes in the last 24 hours, the largest being a 4.0 earthquake. Now, it is in that location, proximity, where the 6.5 earthquake struck back in 2020, the Stanley earthquake up here. Right, here it is, same location, just off the Sawtooth fault system. I was reading some articles here on that earthquake that struck in 2020 that they believe that there may be a separate little fault system up here away from the Stanley, or away from the Sawtooth fault system. And that could be a little concerning here, because that may mean that the Sawtooth fault system here may be in the process of producing some larger earthquake activity here soon. I want to show you guys what I have on it as far as information goes. The Sawtooth fault system here is an east dipping normal fault. It's got vertical motion associated with it, so thrust, uplift, which runs along the eastern base of the Sawtooth Mountains in the state of Idaho. They discovered here, this guy, Glenn Thackeray, and colleagues from the Idaho State University discovered the Sawtooth Fault near the base of the mountains using the LiDAR imagery. That was 2010. They found that it could produce an earthquake measuring up to magnitude 7.5, and that two past large earthquakes likely took place on the fault around 7,000 and 4,000 years ago. That's about 3,000 year displacement in there between the two. The fault's about 40 miles long and runs near Stanley, Idaho, and the Redfish Lake. Future earthquakes, should they strike on this fault system up in the 7.5 range, could be felt far as Boise. Now, the 6.5 earthquake here, it mentions that this quake is likely not on the Sawtooth Fault, as it had a strike-slip motion rather than the up-down motion of a normal fault. So what does this all mean? Well, let's take a look here at the earthquake activity in question first, right? Why so many earthquakes happening? Are they aftershock sequences here, or is this something new due to the built-up strain here along the Sawtooth Fault that's capable of producing a 7.5? And the last one looks like it was 4,000 years ago, right? According to the Glenn Thackeray here, the Idaho State University. 7,000 and 4,000 years ago. If you think about it, I did do a really quick measurement there of time frame for the slip rate out here. Slip rate runs about 0.19 mm, not even a millimeter, right? 0.19 mm. So that's a very, for the most part, very slow slip rate. That's why it takes thousands of years for a big earthquake to strike out here. But if you think about it, 4,000 years ago, that's quite a bit of time period. So I did the math, come up to about 6 to 7 feet or so of built-up strain and stress out here. Now, that's just an average number, and they believe the slip rate runs about, like I said, 0.19 to 0.21 mm per year. Obviously, it's slow compared to other fault systems, but that's also vertical displacement there. With the Sawtooth fault system. So, 4,000 years ago, that's a long time. So here's the earthquake activity that I pulled up here around that 6.5 that struck in 2020, right? Decent sized earthquake, and magnitude 2.5 and above since then. And we got 1,613 earthquakes. Let me zoom in here just a little bit closer to the vicinity of that 6-pointer, which is right here. Notice a lot of spreading out of these earthquakes recently, including the swarm that we're currently seeing right now. It's getting closer here to the back edge of the mountains, closer to the Sawtooth fault system that runs down here a little bit. Again, that 6.5 was not associated with the Sawtooth fault, but the stress that we're seeing up here at the northern end and inland now is more than likely transfer strain off of the Sawtooth fault system. There's other faults out here, but I believe this migration that we're seeing right now is something to watch here quite closely. There was some events back here as well following the 6.5 that migrated further down south here. It's interesting as it's somewhat around the 6.5 area, but spreading out as well since that event back in 2020. So that's why I'm thinking here the Sawtooth fault could be the culprit of this activity. These very well may be stress quakes, some type of foreshocks out here to the Sawtooth fault system experiencing a big earthquake. It's 4,000 years ago since the 7.5 struck out here. And the slip rate being slow, in 4,000 years, you can build up a little bit of a slip there in that time frame. But that's a lot of earthquake activity, right? So whether this is just aftershock sequences or this leading to something bigger in the area, it's something to definitely wonder about here and look and investigate, see where this may be headed. And I believe it's firmly stress and strain related out there. Nothing volcanic. It has nothing to do with Yellowstone here. If you really think about it, Yellowstone is a distance away. It's Idaho is not underneath a hot spot, right? The North American plate obviously moving off to the west-northwest and over that hot spot over time to where we're at right now with Yellowstone over here. But it used to be out here, obviously, but no longer. That was a long, long time ago. But the faults here are still out here. There's a little article here by the Idaho Geology org site asking, quite a few folks asking whether there's a connection to Yellowstone or not. The answer is no. The Stanley earthquake there that struck back in 6.5 is over 200. It struck 6.5 back in 2020 is over 200 miles away from Yellowstone and located in a very different tectonic environment. But there's been some large earthquakes out here, right? Except for the Sawtooth fault system. That, again, 4,000 years ago. It wouldn't be documented here on the map because historically it hasn't happened. But they can study and see when last large events struck on that fault system. That's why they came up with 7,000, 4,000 years ago. Back in 1983, there was a 6.9 out here a little bit further away. And, of course, around the Yellowstone area, 7.2, the Hebgen Lake Estates earthquake, and quite a few around the Yellowstone caldera. But it's this fault system here that I'm watching closely. And, the only troubling thing here is the migration of these quakes over the last 5 years since the Stanley, Idaho earthquake, right? It's been that long. I can't believe it, 6.5. Migration down south, migration inland off of these fault systems. Some movement down here across the Sawtooth fault system here, but really, very slim pickings. 3.2, somewhat deep as well. I tried to find a GPS station up there that could maybe help me spot perhaps uplift, vertical displacement up there over time. But then again, it's a very slow slip rate area. It'd be right around here, potentially this area. Oh, this is a GPS displacement. Really not seeing anything of any abnormal activity. 2017, 2018 had a little uptick there. If anything, it looks like we're kind of going down, but nothing out of the ordinary. But then again, this is, this station there is south here of the Stanley area. Really nothing up here around the Sawtooth mountain range. But, yeah, again, a 7.5 up here would definitely be damaging. if I remember right, I think the USGS here has a scenario. Let me see here. I just want to check and see if they have that. I thought at one point USGS had a scenario as far as a 7.5 striking on the Stanley or on the Sawtooth fault system faults, but I can't find it. This is from the 2026.5 earthquake there. I keep wanting to call that the Stanley fault, but it's not. It's a Sawtooth fault system out here, and it's like I said, it's capable of producing some big earthquakes. And with the swarm that's happening around it right now, and the magnitudes that are getting bigger out here, a 6.5 struck, like I said, a little bit further up north. This movement further down south, northern end potentially here of the Sawtooth fault, and this is just a fairly new discovered fault system out here. But historically, 4,000 years ago, I guess, and 7,000 years ago, it can produce some big earthquakes. So we got to watch these, even though these are quiet, somewhat sleeping faults out here, so to speak, just because of the slip rate that's really not all that high or that common. You don't see a lot of earthquake activity or hear about a lot of earthquake activity, except for now, definitely got quite a few folks wondering what's going on out here. Could be aftershocks, possibly, from the 6.5 5 years ago. We can see aftershocks lasting decades following the main event, but I'm just not sold on that. I think something here may be building up, has been building up here for thousands of years on the Sawtooth fault system that could be producing some large earthquake activity here soon. And I believe it's all stress related. I mentioned that because we had little earthquakes swarming there on the Yellowstone seismograph stations here. These are all, that's crazy amount of earthquake activity, but those are a lot of the events happening over in Idaho, not local to Yellowstone National Park. This is Yellowstone overview, but those threes, and you get into the 4 range there, are starting to show up across the Yellowstone stations. Idaho just sits over here to the west off of this area, but those seismic waves are going to show up on the majority of the seismograph stations there in Yellowstone simply because of the magnitudes out there. But that's not local earthquake. The local earthquake that was striking out here, I believe that was yesterday. There was a handful of smaller events. Let's see here. I think maybe it was previous to this. Yeah, right here around Mary Lake. Quite a few small earthquakes. These are all localized earthquakes here to Yellowstone. I showed up on Purple Mountain as well. But it was about that time, and about that time that the Stanley earthquake activity started kicking up as well, indicating strain out here against the western area of the North American plate. This follows a bunch of tremor activity out here along the Cascadia here recently. That's got to be putting pressure inland as well. This is the North American Craton area, center portion of the North American plate, kind of like the core here that's been relatively stable for lots and lots and millions of years or so, according to the scientists and whatnot. So nothing really deforms within the center portion. That's why you always have a lot of just flat land and occasionally some hills and stuff like that, but it's relatively stable. And areas around it deform, the Rocky Mountains, areas on the eastern side. But the western side here is the big warping areas that get deformed due to that interaction here with the North American Craton. But there's been a lot of tremor out here, a lot of earthquakes kicking off there in Northern California recently because of all the tremor. But that's all stopped. Now we're seeing inland earthquake activity happen. And it's just hitting right out here outside of Stanley, Idaho. I'm really tempted to drive up there. I'll have to see what my schedule looks like here. It's not that far of a drive from where I'm at there in Northern California. It is just off a highway here, off Highway 75. I don't know if I have any visual here of this fault system. I'd have to go inland. I'm just kind of curious to see what's around there. I'm guarantee you, if you're up here off of 75, when these threes, even the 2-pointers hit, you can probably feel them. 4-pointer for sure. Let's see how far the 4-pointer was felt. Very sparsely populated area, so that's probably why there's not a whole lot showing up. But even around Boise City, Haley area. So imagine being, within that zone of where the earthquake activity is happening. Definitely be able to feel it. But I'm thinking, like I say, I'm thinking we need to watch this Sawtooth fault system just because of its proximity here to all the earthquake activity. The 6.5 there a few years ago, maybe a not associated with the Sawtooth fault, but it could have something to do with the general stress that's been building up in this area. Could be potentially transferring here to a different area off of this Sawtooth fault system that's got a lot of time built up as far as slip rate goes. So I guess we'll see what happens. I'm having issues trying to find a seismograph station out there as far as a local reading there. Been looking through all of these, and I really can't see anything specifically for the Idaho area. A lot of times if you want to add new seismograph stations out there on the map, let me bring that back. You would have to add the station out there, the network, and then go from there. But there's not a whole lot of seismograph stations up there. I do have one right here near Haley, Idaho, but that's again a little ways down here. Let's see, I don't know exactly where Haley is. I guess right down here, and the Sawtooth fault system right up here. So about 10-20 miles away or so. Even further though from the earthquake activity, so it may not necessarily be picking up these 2-pointers, but I'm sure 3-pointers will be showing up on that station there. Haley, Idaho. So just like I say, a little bit of information out there, folks, on the Sawtooth fault system. I know a lot of people think that this is just strictly related to that 6.5 that struck out here a number of years ago, just aftershock activity. But this is really stirred up here just out of the blue, and really starting to amplify as far as the magnitudes go. And they're getting bigger. That's the thing. The magnitudes are not going down. This morning was a 4-pointer, 3.9. All the largest magnitudes here with this sequence of events have happened today, this morning. Previous to that was quite a few 3s and 2s and 1s, but the magnitudes out here are getting bigger, and normally that's not a good sign. If you want something to go away, obviously you want to see this bring down smaller magnitudes and then completely go away, but that's not happening. So watch this area closely. I'm thinking we may see some larger activity out here in the vicinity of this earthquake swarm here soon. It could be more than likely it's a Sawtooth fault system. Had some activity down there across New Zealand as well, just off the Alpine fault. 4.6, that's not a good area to see earthquake activity. That's another region that it hasn't had any large earthquake activity historically, and it's been quite a long time. They can document when these earthquakes struck by looking at rock fractures and whatnot, but a lot of time has passed on that, and now we're getting some earthquake activity on there. 4.6 that struck just this morning. Alaska jumping in on some activity as well across the Aleutian Trench. This may be associated with a volcano up here though, near the Adak, Alaska area. That's a lot of earthquake activity within that zone, and fairly shallow as well. Let me bring up the Alaska volcano site here real quick and see what we got. The AVO. Maybe, well, the Great Sitka volcano has been active for a little while. I wonder if that's where it's at. June 3rd. Lava continues to erupt slowly in the summit crater of Great Sitka volcano. But this has been, like I say, an ongoing deal here for a little bit. Maybe, yeah, see, I don't even know if it's associated with that area because I only see one earthquake nearby. This may be associated with something else, a different volcano. Of course, there's volcanoes all over the place here. So I'm thinking, yeah, if you look, that would be more than likely associated with some of those volcanoes that are not monitored over here, right? Am I looking at the right area? There's those. Looks like it might be, I keep going back and forth. This area potentially up here, one of these unmonitored ones. This one? Kanaga? Potentially? Let's see what their, do they have Webby quarters up here? Maybe. Let's see here. Yeah, there's a couple of them. That's pretty close. Those are very sharp spikes there on the seismograph station. So that's some local activity. That's probably where it's at from this volcano, which I don't really know a whole lot about the Kanaga one. It's let's see here. I'll have to check back on this. I'm not for sure when the last eruption activity was. But a little bit of earthquake activity, and that it's definitely showing up there on the seismograph stations around that specific volcano, just off to the side it looks like. That's actually a lot of earthquake activity. So I'll double check on that a little bit later. Main thing is I wanted to cover the activity in Idaho, just in case something happens out here, because it's like I say, it's not going away. It's continuing to build. Northern end here, the Sawtooth Fault, south of where that 6.5 struck in 2020. 4,000 years ago, 7.5 magnitude they feel is the appropriate size for this fault system. So we'll continue to watch it. California-wise here, really nothing major going on out here across California for now. Southern California has been a quiet zone. A little bit of activity out here across, what is this fault system? Hunting Creek, Berryessa Fault. Showing a little bit of activity right now. Looks at 2.1. I know Seattle had a little shaker up there this morning at 2.9. That originally came in as a 3-pointer. Looks like they downgraded that just off the Devil's Mountain Fault. But for the most part, just kind of watching things out here. I'll see how it goes. And, of course, if I decide to head up here to investigate this area, it's a neat little drive. It's up there in the mountains. Idaho's got some beautiful country up there. I'd like to see if I can chat with some of the locals or neighbors out here, see what they're feeling. I don't think there's a whole lot of people out there, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, if I do decide to go up there, I'll let you guys know beforehand. We'll be back here a little bit later on, folks, to cover this and more. Whatever, I don't know what happened to the seismograph stations here. They all just went offline for some reason. And I'm not for sure why. Just gone. But not us, we're still live. Anyway, I'll check on that, and hopefully they'll come back. Have a good one. We'll see you guys back out here a little bit later on this evening, folks. Keep an eye on Idaho. Catch you guys later.